All right. I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Revelation chapter 20. And this video is inspired by a comment that Elder Pastor made. I believe that was the last video he did. Can't remember the name, Salakia. So many videos that go up, you kind of forget the names of these videos. But I believe it was the very last video he put up, and he mentioned that someone should do a breakdown on Revelation chapter 20. So I thought that was, a good idea, because I didn't have anything, on the burner, so to speak. And I was, searching for something to go into, Lord's will to edify, and Lord's will to be an edifying lesson. Now, before we begin, I would like to say that there are certain scriptures in the Bible that are difficult to understand sometimes, because when people read the Bible, they try to read it like a fable. They try to read it like a book, that you pick up and you read from the beginning to the end. And they try to understand it that way. They figure they start at page 1 and go all the way to the last page, they'll be able to get the whole story and the meaning of the scriptures. But that's not how the Bible is written. Let's go real quick to the book of Isaiah, chapter 28. And also the Bible is written in parables, which parables are pretty much a riddle form. It's parabolic. Sometimes when you read the scripture, sometimes it's straightforward, and sometimes it's in an allegorical sense, but it means something else. It may be written a certain way, but it means something else, And the Lord has given us the teachers to be able to break those mysteries down, to us, and if the Spirit is working with you, you'll see that. If not, then I don't know what to tell you. Isaiah 28:9. Whom shall he teach knowledge, and whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Meaning the Most High is going to, this is a question, who is the Lord going to teach knowledge, and who is he going to make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast, because when we all come into this thing at first, we come into this thing like babies, sucking their mother's breast to get that nutrition or those nourishments to be able to grow. So once a baby no longer has need of his mother's milk, that means the baby is weaned. So once a brother comes into this thing and they learn for a certain period of time, the milk of the scriptures, then eventually it comes a point where they're ready for solid foods, so to speak. So who's the Lord going to teach? Those that are drawn from those that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. Now you're ready to go on unto perfection. Then it goes on to say, for precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. So in other words, when you read these scriptures, the scriptures jump. You may read something in Genesis, and a scripture in Isaiah will be a link up to it, or a scripture in Matthew might be a link up to it, or you may have to go to the book of 2nd Ezra in the Apocrypha, to link up certain scriptures together. Also this is dealing with, how the scriptures have taken Jake a little here and a little there, but the Bible is a puzzle. And sometimes when you read a particular chapter, it doesn't follow in succession, It jumps around in history. And such is the case with the book of Revelation, the 20th chapter. And we'll give you an example of that as we read through it. All right. So let's start off Revelation 20:1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. What does this mean? The bottomless pit is a representation of Europe. What is a bottomless pit, or what is bottomless? Meaning that there's no bottom to it. All right. So a bottomless pit would be something that has no bottom to it. So how do we know that this is actually speaking about lands and is not actually speaking about a place called hell, as these people try to make you believe? Well, let's go to the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 5 and verse 23. And it states, and said, O Lord, that bearest rule of every wood of the earth, and of all the trees thereof, thou hast chosen thee only one vine. And of all lands, so what are we dealing with here? Lands. First we were dealing with trees and vines. Now we're dealing with what? Lands. And of all lands of the whole world, thou hast chosen thee what? One pit. And what is that one pit? That one pit is the land of Israel. That's the pit that the Lord. So lands are considered to be pits. But these pits, some of them are fruitful, have many different nutrients and resources in it, different minerals, and where you could grow vegetation, spices, so on and so forth. And some of them don't. And it just so happens that in Europe, they have a lack of mineral resources. That's why they can't grow a lot of food there. They have to outsource their food, so to speak, or not outsource. They have to bring in their food from other sources like India and different other places, the islands and places that are fruitful in vegetation, to be able to import into their particular country. And that is the case with Europe. And that's why it's called a bottomless pit, because no matter how far down you dig, you're not going to find the nutrient-rich soil that you would if you went to places like India or Israel, or around the so-called Babylon, Iraq, Iran, and those areas where they have rich soil in certain places. This is why the so-called scholars call that region, they call it the Fertile Crescent, because that's where the world started to be repopulated again by Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, so the bottomless pit is Europe. So the key of the bottomless pit, the key is a representation of locking somebody up. It says the bottomless pit is Europe, and a great chain in his hand, and the great chain is a representation of slavery. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to hit this word bottomless pit, because they try to say that this is it's from the Greek word abusos, is where you get the word abyss, right? And listen what they say: bottomless, unbounded, the abyss, the pit, the immeasurable depth, which all of this is correct. Now when we get here of Orcus, a very deep gulf or chasm in the lowest parts of the earth, used as a common receptacle of the dead, and especially as the abode of demons, right? Now there was somewhere else that I read, right? Here it says, and of deathless, an example, specially infernal. There's nothing in this word that implies anything to do with infernal. What is infernal? That means infernal, or like to burn. There is nothing in this word itself that indicates anything to do with fire. Okay? And now it comes from a compound word. Abusos, or abyss, comes from a compound word of alpha and buthos. Now what is alpha? Alpha is the very first letter of the Greek alphabet. First letter of Greek alphabet. Okay? The beginning and the end. So alpha, or beginning, right? And then you have the other part of the root word, which is buthos. Now what is buthos? The bottom or depth of the sea itself, the deep sea. So notice it has nothing to do with infernal, hot, fiery flames, none of that. But this is what they do. Now another key here is what? Orcus. Now who is Orcus? Orcus is a false god that of the Romans, where they so-called send the abode of the dead, or the so-called infernal region, so-called. And when we go here, I just typed in who was Orcus. Orcus, Latin Orcus, was a god of the underworld, punisher of broken oaths, in italic and Roman mythology. So it's a mythology that was what? That was linked in to the scriptures. And this is why you have that lie of hell being taught out there. But that's another topic for another lesson. If any brother wants to jump on that, they can jump on that and get down. You know, so we're going to go back to Revelation chapter 20 and verse 1, and we're going to deal with a great chain in his hand, which the great chain is a representation of slavery. Let's go to the word chain, because the word great is megas, and the word chain is halusis, a chain bound by which the body or any part of it, hands, feet, is bound. Now, when I look right here, of uncertain derivation, a fetter or manacle. Fetters go on the feet, manacles go on the hand. Bonds, chains. So it's a representation of what? Slavery. So now let's go to a couple of precepts. Let's go to the book of Psalms, chapter 2, verse 8. And it says, or reads, ask of me, and I shall give you the heathen for thine inheritance. So what does it mean to give you the heathen for your inheritance? It means to give them as servants. Because pursuant to the law, we are supposed to take servants, slaves of the heathen, of the other nations. It says, in the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession, because we're going to inherit the nations as slaves, and we're going to inherit pretty much the world and many more things. That's just giving it a light understanding. That's another lesson. Now let's go from there to the book of Psalms, the 149th chapter and the 5th verse. Let the saints be joyful in glory. Who are the saints? The Israelites. You could go to the previous chapter to prove that. Let them, and what is the glory? The glory is the kingdom of heaven. Let them sing aloud upon their beds. Why? Because when we get to the kingdom, we're going to be happy. You know, like today, you have these international banking families, these rich men of the world, that when they get up in the morning, they're happy because they have everything. But they have everything on the as a sleight of hand, or as a fraud or oppression, and they're going to lose it all. And shalom to the elders in Akim and Akwarth on the comment board. Shalom, GMS Italia. Shalom, brother. It says, let the high praises of the Most High be in their mouth, which is what? The Bible. And a two-edged sword in their hand, which is what? A killing instrument. For what purpose? To execute vengeance, because there's going to be an execution of vengeance, and that's another topic. Upon the heathen, because it's not going to be upon the Israelites, it's going to be upon the heathen. Why? For what they've done. And punishments upon the people, because they have to pay. And this is their first destination after the destruction is what? Slavery. To bind their kings with chains. See? So who are their kings? Their leaders with chains. Put them in those chains. Now this scripture here in Revelation chapter 20 was a time period where Satan, or the adversary, which is not the spiritual demon Satan, but the physical counterpart, which are the Edomites, so-called white people, so you could understand, they were bound. There was a dark cloud put over them. They were in the region of Europe, because that's where you had the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. They spread abroad. They took down a lot of Germanic tribes, and they had all of those lands. So when they fell, they were in chains. Some of them were actual slaves. Some of them were just in a position to where they couldn't get out of it. Just like we're under curses and we can't get out of it till the Lord frees us up and gets rid of that dark cloud. Well, they were under that dark cloud for a certain period of time. So it says to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron. And that is a representation of slavery, total subjugation. To execute upon them the judgment written, because we read about this all throughout the scriptures. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity, and many others. This honor have all his saints, praise ye the Lord. So this is an honor to be able to put these nations into slavery. So any Israelite that doesn't want slaves, there's something wrong with their faculties. The mind faculty not right. Inside joke. All right. Now, let's go back to Revelation chapter 20. Revelation 20 and 2. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, meaning the angel, which I believe this angel is Yahushua, because it says that he has a key of the bottomless pit. When you go to the first chapter, the 18th verse, it speaks about Yahushua having that key. It says, and he laid hold on the dragon, which the dragon is the Roman Empire, and is also representation of the whole beast, with the 7 heads and 10 horns. The whole thing is a representation of the 7 major empires of Esau. Is also a representation of the of NATO and the EU, and everything that they have. That old serpent, which goes back to the Garden of Eden, because that same spirit that was in that man, that was in the garden, that was called the serpent, is the same spirit that was in Cain, and is the same spirit that was in Esau, and is the same spirit that's in you Edomites, or you so-called white people today, which is the devil, which is a slanderer, a deceiver, and Satan, which is what? The adversary. And this is why people don't understand, because they're taking this literally as it being the spiritual demon Satan, which is not, because the spiritual demon Satan is in total order with the Most High and bound him 1,000 years. And this is a key date. Now, like I said, when we get further down, I'm going to show you how the time periods of that 1,000 years jumps. And this is why, if you don't understand that history, you're going to get confused when you read this, because it's going to sound like, once Satan is or Esau is put into captivity, there's going to come a time where they're going to get out of it and then put us back in captivity. No, that's not going to happen. All right, so now let's deal with that. Let's go to dealing with the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. All right, let's go from there to the book of Revelation chapter 12. And I believe that's verse 3, right? Yep. The red dragon, Satan, which this is a representation of Esau's whole power structure. All of the kingdoms, starting from the Greeks, the Romans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and Great Britain. I believe that was all 5. Let me see. The Greeks, the Romans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and the British. That's it. That's their whole, the 7 heads, the 7 empires of the so-called white men that ruled, beginning with the Greek Empire. So when the Greeks came into power, which were the first Edomites to take control of the known world, that began the beginning of this great red dragon. All right, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads, which shows you here that this is not dealing with the spiritual demon Satan. This was an actual beast that John saw in his vision, but that beast was a representation of different empires. How do we know that? When we go to the same book of Revelation, chapter 17 and verse 9. It reads, and here is a mind which has wisdom. So now the angel is going to break this down to the apostle John, which he still really didn't understand, but this really was written down for us today so that we can understand what is meant by this great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and the crowns upon their horns. It says the 7 heads are 7 mountains, which mountains in the scriptures is a representation of governments. You have the G used to be the G8. They kicked Russia out, so now it's the G7, which is a meeting of top or major governments. And what do they, when they come together, what do they call that? They call that a summit. Now, what is a summit? What is a summit? Let's see what comes up. and that's called the G8 summit, or now it's G7 summit, the highest point of a hill or mountain, a meeting between heads of government. And that's what a government is a representation of, which we read here in Revelation 17. And here is a mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And the woman, being America, she sits on, they pretty much propping her up. That's why when you read up above, it says that the beast carried the woman. Because America is pretty much being carried by these European nations. And they're getting tired of carrying this hoe. All right. And there are 7 kings, which lets you know that it's not talking about 7 mountains. There were 7 kings, which are rulers. 5 are fallen, because by the time when the Apostle John had this vision, you had the Greeks and the French, the Spanish. The Greeks. Yeah, the Greeks, the French, the Spanish, Germanian Major and Germanian Minor, that fell to who? They fell to the Roman Empire, which was in rulership at the time when John had this vision. And around this same time was when the last Edomite ruler of the Roman Empire died, which was Vespasian, which he died around 96 AD. And this is around the time when the Apostle John had this vision. But the kingdom, even though Jake was ruling, starting with Nerva, the kingdom was still run under the Roman rule as far as their legislation and all of that. It hadn't made a transition yet. Right? So in their 7 kings, 5 are fallen, which you just mentioned them, and 1 is. So who was the one that was in this time? That was dealing with the Roman Empire. So that makes 6. And the other is not yet come, because the other one still hadn't really ruled yet, which was what? Great Britain. And when he cometh, meaning when he starts to rule, he must continue a short space. And they have continued a short space, because from the time they started ruling to the time America came into place and they took over, which America happens to be the 8th, they didn't really rule that long. Although behind the scenes they're still pulling the strings, so to speak, but on paper, and to the world, they're not ruling anymore. All right. All right. So it says, and the beast that was and is not, that's dealing with America. When you read up above that, it says even he is the 8th, because America is the 8th. Because remember, Daniel 7 speaks about that little horn that came out, which is a representation of America, that power. So America is the 8th and is of the 7. In other words, America came out of that demonic union of those 7 heads, or those 7 so-called European empires, or Edomite European empires, and goeth what? Into perdition. Because the reason why America was established was to push wickedness upon the earth, and the Lord using America as an example when he destroys America. It says, and the 10 horns, well, that's pretty much it. We don't need to read. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's read that. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which lets you know that this beast, which this is breaking down, that the 7 heads and 10 horns, this beast that the Apostle John saw represented rulers and their governments. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. See? And the beast is a representation of the whole system. You have America, you have NATO, you have the EU, and all of them are riding off of the back of all of those 7 empires. All right, America being the 8th today. Hope you brothers understand. All right, now let's go back to Revelation chapter 20, and let's deal with the 1,000 years. So now, when did this 1,000 years begin? This 1,000 years really began, the Roman Empire with the Edomites really fell in 96 AD. When Nerva came into power, which he was a Jake, that's when Jake started ruling. But remember, they were still ruling under Roman authority, under Roman legislation. So really, technically, when you move it up around 325 AD or so, this is really when there was a change from the Roman rule into what they call the so-called Holy Roman Empire. So you could kind of throw that in there as a date, even though Jake was already in rulership. And although Constantine was a pagan, but he so-called adopted Christianity with pagan worship, and it became the Holy Roman Empire. So roughly around that time period, that's when, right, the Byzantine Empire started to really come into fruition. But you still had the influence of Rome, the Roman legislation and all that. All right. So from that time period until until Esau came back into power, that's when that 1,000 years came to be. All right. So it says, so that was a 1,000-year period. And the Byzantine Empire, Dark Ages, or when Esau fell, they fell around 96 AD. But really, when you go up further, like I said, during the time of Constantine, and when you type in when did the Renaissance begin, they say the 1300s. It's really more like the mid 1300s, which lines up with the 1,000-year period from around the time of Constantine till the beginning of the Byzantine Empire. But they really started getting deep into it, into the Renaissance around the mid 1400s into the 1500s. Okay? Yeah, that's right. The Renaissance rebirth, deadly wound was healed. That's right. That goes with Revelation 13. Yep, you got the Renaissance. Yep. All right, so going back, it says, so the Lord laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, which is dealing with Esau, and bound him 1,000 years. So they put a prison sentence on Esau for that time period, and cast him into the bottomless pit because they were still in Europe, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him. So when they sealed him, he couldn't go anywhere. It's just like when somebody's thrown in prison, they can't go anywhere. They're locked up, and they gotta wait until the date when they can be released. So that's what happened to Esau, that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. And that's what happened. They were loosed that little season, which is what the so-called Renaissance period. Now, which we read here that the Renaissance started around 1300, but it really was around the mid 1300s. All right. So this is the point in the chapter where it starts to jump, because if you read into the next verse, you're gonna think that this 1,000 years here is connected to this 1,000 years, and it's not. Because here it says after that he must be loosed a little season. So what we have to do is, instead of reading on, we got to jump down to the 7th verse. Satan freed, doomed. Right here it says what? He must be loosed for a little season. Satan freed, doomed. See? So we read here, Revelation 27, and when the 1,000 years are expired, meaning this 1,000 years, that first 1,000 years, it says, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan or Esau shall be loosed out of his prison, meaning they're going to come out of that cloudy haze, so to speak, and those chains are going to be taken off them, and they're going to be able to take root once again in the earth. But how is it that they took their root in the earth? Well, let's read on. And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth. So the very first thing they did was they deceived the nations which were in the 4 quarters of the earth. And how did they do that? Through the Renaissance period. And the brother from Italia, he put the term iconoclasm, which iconoclasm is a compound word. Icon, which is image, and clasm, which is the defacing. All right. Here he goes. The rejection or destruction of religious images as heretical. The doctrine of iconoclasm. Because how is it that you can be an Edomite, a so-called white man, right? And you're proclaiming to be the new rulers of the earth, But every image that you see is a dark-skinned image. The images of the Heavenly Father and his son Yahweh Shai and the angels and the Israelites and the prophets were all brown-skinned people. So how can you rule having this as the paintings that you're supposed to represent? So they had to take it down and destroy it. That's why you have the term iconoclasm, the rejection or destruction of religious images as heretical, the doctrine of iconoclasts. So now let's go back where we at. Let's go back. So we read that. Oh, yes. Shai came back. Now let's go from there to get a couple of these precepts here. Job chapter 13 and 4. It says, but you are forgers of lies. So what does the word forgers mean? When you forge something, it means you replicate it, but in a falsified way, for lack of better words. The word is tapal. To smear, plaster over, stick, glue. Hey, sounds like iconoclasm to me. You know? It says to impute falsely, forge. Now, when we look up this word forge, the word forge definition, it says make or shape a metal or by heating. So you can forge something by making it, shaping it, right? So on and so forth. Create a relationship, a new condition. Let's see if we could find another. Let's see what this says. Right here. To make a forgery or counterfeit. This is what we're looking for. Forgery or counterfeit. The act of forging something, especially the unlawful act of counterfeiting a document or object for the purpose of fraud or deception. So we just read that you are forgers of lies. You know, it says here to smear, plaster over, stick, glue. All right, so let's go back. It says, but you are forgers of lies, you are all physicians of no value. So that's what they are. They're forgers of lies. Now let's go from there to the same book of Job 9:24. Because how did they forge these lies? Job 9:24. It says, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. So the scripture is saying that the earth is given in possession to the wicked. We read in the scriptures that the wicked are identified with the Edomites, although you have wicked among all nations, but the nation of the Edomites are the wicked. So the earth has been given into their hands. So what did they do when the earth was given into their hand? He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. So what does it mean to cover the faces of the judges thereof? It means to plaster over, to smear, to hide, to forge, to make a forgery. Right? So we look at the word covereth. You have the word kasa, to cover, conceal, hide. So they hid something. What did they hide? It says the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the what? The faces of the judges thereof. Who is the top judge of everything? The Most High Yahweh. How did he cover the Most High's face as a judge thereof? By putting up his face, his forgery. You see? By him putting himself up as being the Most High. You go to 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter. It tells you how he sits in the temple of the Most High, showing himself that he is the Most High, that he's worshipped. You see? So this is a smear campaign that they had for that period of time, known as the Renaissance, which the Renaissance, re is back and the sans is birth. The rebirth of who? Not the rebirth of Slick, Diggable Planets, for those of you brothers that remember that group. It was dealing with the rebirth of Esau coming back out of that state of being in captivity, that dark cloud. And the very first thing he did was deceive the whole earth by painting his images around the world as he's the Most High, and he's Yahweh Shai, he's the angels, and he's the Israelites, and he's all these great men and kings, and the great civilizations was all Edomites. When everything that they do, they steal from the other nations. They call themselves the Aryan race. The original Aryan race were the Elamites, the so-called East Indians. Everything they got, they stole from somebody. You know, there was a point, I don't know if it's going to come up, but there's something dealing with the Etruscans that they stole from the Etruscans and incorporated into their everyday life. All of them different religious rites and all of that they got, and witchcraft and all that, they stole that from the dark nations. So they covered the faces of the judges thereof. If not, if they didn't do it, where and who is he? Who did this? Okay, who did this? Who did this? Who did it? Who done it? What nation of people fits this bill? Who did this? When you go down the line, by process of elimination, the so-called white man did it. So they are the wicked. And the Bible identifies the Edomites as being the wicked. Now, let's go to Isaiah 25:7. And he, meaning the Most High, will destroy in this mountain, meaning in America, this government, because this is where the truth came from. The main problem that these Christian apologetics like Vocab and Dr. James White, the Edomite, and all the rest of them devils have is what? With the so-called One Westers, the Hebrew Israelites of One West. And he will destroy in this mountain, meaning the Most High is going to destructure in America the face of the covering cast over all people. So these lies that were cast over all people are going to be knocked down, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of the Most High. So that's what's happening here. So the prophets are out here tearing down these strongholds, these lies that these devils have put up. And that's what the book of Revelation 20 is about. It's about breaking down and showing you in history what took place, what happened, and how the Lord is turning everything right side up. It says, and the veil that is spread over all nations. So going back to Revelation chapter 20, right? We'll get back to this later, Lord's will, the Gog and Magog part, which is Russia. Now that we read the first 3 verses and that 1,000 years, and we linked it up with the 7th and the 8th verse for the 1,000 years, that was a time from the ending of the Byzantine/Dark Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance until this time now. All right. Now we do is we jump back in time. We jump forward in time after Esau does what he does, right? And this verse 4 is talking about the kingdom of heaven. This 1,000 years is talking about in the kingdom of heaven. Totally different from the 1,000 years in the previous verse, even though it seems like it's going lined up with the 3rd verse. It's not. Revelation 20:4, and I saw thrones. So this is what the Apostle John saw. He saw actual Israelites ruling in the kingdom of heaven. And they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Yahweh Shai, which are the men of the Lord, the prophets, the apostles, the rest of the men, teachers, so on and so forth, and for the word of the Most High, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon his foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Yahweh Shai 1,000 years. This is in the kingdom of heaven. A totally different 1,000 years than the previous verses. All right, so let's go from there. Let's deal with the book of, let's go to Matthew chapter 19, dealing with the thrones. Matthew chapter 19 and verse 27. And it said, and it reads, the disciples' reward. See? Matthew 19:27. Then answered Peter and said unto him, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? So we gave everything up. So what are we going to receive in return? Right? It says, and Yahweh said unto them, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration or in the reincarnation, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, which is what? The kingdom of heaven, and the Israelites being joint heirs with the Lord, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what this fourth verse is speaking about. That's what this 1,000-year period here is speaking about in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, and that's why the Apostle John saw thrones. Now, let's go from there to the book of Psalms, chapter 122 and verse 5. For there are set thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. So the house of David, the men that were with King David, they're going to be sitting on thrones in the kingdom of heaven. There's going to be a government, a governing body. All right. And that's going to be in the kingdom of heaven. So Revelation 20 and 4 is totally different than Revelation 1 to 3. This 1,000-year period here is different from this 1,000-year period here. This 1,000-year period was from the fall of the Roman Empire till the Renaissance period. And this 1,000-year period here in the fourth verse is dealing with the kingdom of heaven. Two totally different time periods. Now, let's go back. Now let's go to Revelation chapter 5 and verse 9. And it reads, and they sung a new song, saying, thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, dealing with Yahweh Shai. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to Yahweh by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation, because the Israelites are scattered among all nations. And that's why it speaks about those nations being blessed, because Israelites are there. And has made us unto our power, Yahweh, kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. All right. So this 1,000-year period here of the thrones, what the Apostle John saw, this is dealing with in the kingdom of heaven. All right. Now, from this point, right, we'll jump to the very last part of verse the fifth verse, because this 1,000 years, I mean, it all goes together, but I just want to make the point. And they lived and reigned with 1,000 years, right? This is the first resurrection in the kingdom of heaven. So the first 1,000 years is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that had part in the first resurrection. On such the second death, which is the destruction, the nuclear missiles, hath no power. Why? Because they're sealed to be delivered, to go into the kingdom of heaven, to sit on thrones through the first resurrection. But they shall be priests of the Most High and of Yahweh Shai. And in the 5th chapter, we read they're going to be kings also, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So these 3 verses here are all speaking about the kingdom of heaven. Salaki for a minute. All right, Salaki about that, brothers. I had to take that call. All right, so that is the 2 distinctions, in the 1,000-year period. So now when we go back to the 5th verse, but the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is going to the period after we reign with Yahweh Shai 1,000 years, and after these nations go into captivity. That goes hand in hand. Let the saints be joyful in glory. Let them sing loud upon their beds. And you read on down that the kings be put in chains and the nobles and fetters of iron. That's going to be the first 1,000 years of the kingdom of heaven. After that 1,000-year period that the nations serve their captivity, then they're going to be able to be freer, so to speak. They'll still be tributary, but they'll be able to have their own lands, and be able to govern among themselves, somewhat have a little more freedom, so to speak, but they'll still be tributary to us. They'll still have to be governed by our laws, statutes, and commandments. All right. Now, a precept that goes good with that is in the book of Daniel, chapter 7 and verse 12. As concerning the rest of the beasts, which are the other nations, they had their dominion taken away, because they're gonna be taken away for a certain period of time, yet their lives were prolonged for a season in time. Why? Because eventually the nations will have their own lands, be able to govern themselves and kind of come and go, among themselves, but they'll still be tributary to us. They'll still be our servants and our slaves. The only ones that will not be around are the ones that are going to get Obadiah 1:18. All right, so you could go read that so you can understand what that means. You read Obadiah 1:18 and you'll understand what nation is not going to be around, after that 1,000-year period, because all nations for the first 1,000 years in the kingdom of heaven will be servants. They will be slaves, outside of the nation of Israel. But after 1,000 years, one particular nation is going to be Obadiah 1:18, and you can read about that and you find out who that nation is. Hit. All right, so now let's go from there. Let's go back to Revelation, chapter 20. Now let's deal with the 8th verse, the middle of the 8th verse. But let's read the whole 8th verse again. And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. That's dealing with Esau and his whole demonic empire. It says Gog and Magog, which goes back to Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39, which are the Russians, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea, which is what? Armageddon. Harmageddon. Har is mountain, God is troop, and one at the end makes it plural. Harmageddon, mountain of the troops. And that is that the so-called World War III that will be fought over there in the so-called Middle East. Okay? And they went up on the breadth of the earth, because the Russians will have 5/6 of their armies out there, and only a sixth part, or the one part of their army is going to be left in Russia. The other 5 parts are going to go out to be destroyed. And compass the camp of the saints about, which is the land of Israel, the camp of the saints, not the saints themselves, and the beloved city, which is what? Jerusalem. And fire came down from the Most High out of heaven and devoured them, because there's going to be missiles. There's going to be lasers from the chariots. There's going to be actual fire that the Lord is going to issue, pelt down upon these devils when this destruction comes. It's going to be a devastating destruction, man. Let's go from there to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, to give you like a little. Just think of Sodom and Gomorrah. Read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and you'll be able to get a visual of how the Lord caused fire to come down from heaven and destroy those cities. So this time is going to be in the form of the missiles and the lasers from the chariots, but the Lord could also cause fire to come down, as well. Hey, because the Lord, when he gets loose, he ain't going to hold back. That's going to be the day of fireworks, fire and brimstone. Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse 3. It says, for this man was, that's Hebrew. Salakia typed in the wrong. It's Habakkuk, not Hebrew. It's Habakkuk 3 and 3. The Most High came from Teman. Believe this is one of this. Actually, this is a representation of Esau, but you also have because they say that this is dealing with the Germans, but you also have what's the word I'm looking for? This also represents Esau, because I believe this goes back. The Temanites go back to the sons of Japhet. I would have to go over there again, but I'm almost positive it goes back to the sons of Japhet. the actual, Japhites, But the Lord, it says, the Most High came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, which his glory is a representation of what? The chariots. And the earth was full of his praise, because the whole world is going to be filled with the knowledge of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. So by the time the Lord comes, the whole world is going to know who it is that's getting busy. All right, it says, and his brightness was as the light, because the chariots are going to be glowing with the lights. And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his side, out of his hand, sorry. And when you look in the red Bible that we have, it says Salakia. Let me get it. It says bright beams. That's what it says. It says bright beams out of his side, which are what? Those lasers. And there was a hiding of his power. When we go to that word horn, right, it goes to the Hebrew word koran. Horn of strength, flask, musical instrument, horn from the altar, of rays of light. All right. So what are these rays of light? What is a ray of light? Concentrated heat. So the chariots are going to fire concentrated heat, which Esau calls what? Lasers. And that's what's going to come up out of these chariots. And his brightness was as the light from the lights of the chariot. He had horns coming out of his side, which are the lasers coming out. And there was the hiding of his power, because that's how he's coming to take this devil down. Remember, Yahushua is coming traveling in the power of his strength. It says he stood and measured the earth and beheld. He stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, because that's what he's coming to do. And the everlasting mountains, which are what? The different government, the higher governments, America, Russia, China, so on and so forth, were scattered. And the perpetual hills, which are the smaller governments, he did bow. His ways are everlasting, because the scriptures say that in that day alone the Lord shall be exalted. The haughtiness of men shall be put down. All right, so that's showing you that the chariots are coming with concentrated heat. So that's more fire. Yahushua said, I am come to send fire on the earth, and what will I if it be already kindled? So going back to Revelation chapter 20 and 10, it says, and the devil, which are the Edomites, their power structure that deceived them, was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. So Esau's whole power structure is going to be taken down overnight by the Lord in 1 hour. It says, where the beast and the false prophet are. The beast, EU and NATO, and also the different heads of Esau, and the false prophet are, which are, the false prophet is dealing with the Roman Catholic Church, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Right. So their smoke is going to go up for a long period of time. That's what it means. They're going to be tormented day and night. When it speaks about the worm eating them forever and the smoke going up, descended forever, that's talking about for a very long time, generation after generation, because there's going to be a lot of fuel and fire that's going to destroy this place. Let's get real quick. Isaiah chapter 9 and 5. It says, for every battle of the warrior is with confused noise. That's how the battles were fought in the past, with helmets and, breastplates and swords and spears. And there was yelling, and fighting, going on. It says, and garments rolled in blood, because you had a lot of blood going on the battlefield. And that was the way that they fought battles in the past. Today, with the technology they have, they don't fight battles like that anymore. They fight battles by shooting missiles at each other. It says, but this, meaning this battle, shall be with burning and fuel of fire. And there's another verse in here that speaks about, I believe it's the meat that's going to be the fuel for that fire. And other the elements, such as cars and planes and trains and buildings and coal and natural gas, propane, so on and so forth. All right, so now Revelation 20:11, judgment at the throne of the Most High. And I saw a great white throne, which is the throne of the Lord, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. Why? Because the new heaven is coming, which is the new heaven and the new earth is the same heaven and the same earth refreshed in righteousness. So wickedness is going to pass and righteousness is going to rule. And there was found no place for them. Yeah, because these nations will never ever rule again. You know? So our kingdom, which is Yahweh kingdom, we join heirs with him, is going to be an everlasting kingdom, which shall not be let out to other people. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before the Most High, and the books were open. It's not talking about actual books. It's talking about the judgments that are coming, that are written in the book. And another book was open, which is the book of life, which is the same book, but it's the elect being delivered. And the dead were judged out of those things which are written in the books according to their works. So in other words, when the kingdom is about to be established and the judgment is coming, those that are to be saved will be delivered, and those that are to be destroyed shall be destroyed. And this is all written in the same book, which is the Bible. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, because you have actual people that died in the seas, and they're going to come out of those seas. It says, and death and hell were delivered up, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. That's dealing with death, people that are actually dead, some people that are dead that haven't even been put into the grave yet, and people that are already in the grave coming out of the graves. It's gonna be something, man. It says, and they were judged every man according to their works. Right. Those that are to be delivered will be delivered. Those that are to be put to death will be put to death. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire, which shows you that hell is not the lake of fire. This is the second death, which is what? The nuclear missiles. You know, you could throw everything else in there, but the main thing is what? The nuclear missiles. That's their lake of fire. And then the lasers from the chariots and everything else is going to just add to the mix. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Meaning, if you're not part of the elect and you're here in America, guess what? Your destiny is to be bathed in that lake of fire. All right? So pretty much with that, that's been the book of Revelation chapter 20. I pray that it was edifying. I pray that your brothers were edified. Until the next time I say, Shalom.